Good morning, developers. If it's not morning where you are, it is morning somewhere, and it is definitely a good morning to learn some Socket.io. The course has the word Socket.io and WebSocket in the title. So the question is, where do they both belong with regard to the course? So the purpose of this video is to try and answer that question early rather than later. There is a video later on in the course that will go into more detail, but I want to put it up front here so you know what to expect and make my case for why the bulk of the course will focus on Socket.io even in 2023. We won't cover any technical or implementation details in this video, so if you're itching to get started and, hey Rob, I don't care about any of this, just teach me and I'll learn, then you can skip this video. Of course, I put it in the course for a reason, so I think it's worth having a listen to. So assuming you decided to stick around, if the course has version 4 in the title, then the main value here is going to be, again, my case for why I'm going to focus on Socket.io and less on WebSockets. If there's version 2, you'll get that, plus you'll also just get an update on where both technologies are at in 2023 as opposed to 2018 when the course was originally released. I'm on the Socket.io homepage here, and you can see up top we've got 4X's out, and again, we started on 2X. If I click on documentation, it takes us to this introduction page, and at the top here, if you don't have any idea what either technology is, we'll talk about it here just real quick. Socket.io is a library that enables low latency, bidirectional, and event-based communication between a client and a server. So they got this cool drawing here. HTTP, which you're very used to, right? The browser, or maybe using Axios or the Fetch API, something like that, will send a request to the server. The server handles the request and sends a response back, and then the connection is terminated. That is the end of that HTTP request. If you want more information, you need to make a new one, which is no big deal, right? Send a new request, get a new response, things are done. Kind of like a text message where you might be texting a vote or some message to a system where you send it over, the server sends it back, and then your connection or your communication's over. Unless you send something new, that's the end of the conversation. With Socket.io and then WebSockets, they are connected all the time. So we establish a connection here on the client with the server, and it's more like a telephone call where if either side has something to say, they just say it. There's no reason to connect because you're already connected. There's no reason for the client to have to say something first. The server can say something first. You get the idea. Okay? It's real-time communication. If for any reason you need real-time updates going either way without having to establish a connection, that's what Socket.io and WebSockets are for. So, low latency, bidirectional, and event-based. I'm going to hop over here to the WebSocket API page. I've got the MDN web docs up. And the WebSocket API is an advanced technology. We'll hit this later, but you should take a nice deep breath and congratulate yourself. You're using an advanced technology. Good stuff. That makes it possible to open a two-way, bidirectional, interactive communication session between the user's browser and the server. With this API, you can send messages to a server and receive event-driven responses, event-based, without having to poll the server for a reply. This last one's a little bit weak, but poll the server for a reply, I'm going to compare to low latency. Okay? So WebSockets and Socket.io are claiming to do pretty much the same thing. Of these two, the WebSocket API is the native technology to JavaScript. So I've got the console open here. We can do console.log WebSocket. Hit enter. I have an NPM installed. Anything, no script tags, anything. This is native to the browser, right? This is built into JavaScript. If you've got JavaScript, you've got WebSockets. I can't do the same thing with Socket.io. That does not exist here, okay? Try any rendition of it that you want. Sockets are not part of JavaScript, okay? So the reason this is important is because for those of you like me, I prefer to use the thing that's closer to the metal, right? The native thing if I can. For instance, I prefer to use JavaScript natively rather than using jQuery, if possible, because jQuery is a bigger library and it just takes up more time, more resources, etc. Okay? Is it worth using the new thing or the other thing as an add-on to the native technology? In this case, that is Socket.io. Well, for jQuery, it definitely was in 2006 because the web was a total disaster. You had no idea what JavaScript was going to do in a given browser, but jQuery standardized that. Is jQuery still necessary in 2023? Well, I hardly ever use it anymore because JavaScript has come so far. It's still on like 95% of websites, I think, that use JavaScript, but I don't really use it anymore because I don't need it anymore. Is that the relationship that we have between Socket.io and WebSockets? Has WebSockets come far enough to where we don't need Socket.io anymore? And I'll show you quick on the WebSocket page. If we scroll down to the bottom here under browser compatibility, WebSockets were available in Chrome 4. Chrome 4, that goes back to 2009, I believe. If I check Google Chrome as of the making of this video, they're on 108. So we've hit triple digits. So this is a long time ago. Socket.io came out the next year in 2010 because WebSockets were, like JavaScript in the mid-2000s, kind of a disaster. It seemed like it never worked. Like I was so excited to try it, but it almost never seemed to work. Socket.io brought some order to that chaos, just like jQuery. Well, has Socket.io been replaced in 2023 by WebSockets? Well, we're going to real quick look at the Socket.io docs here. First things first, up at the top here, Socket.io is built on top of the WebSocket protocol. Okay, it does some additional stuff. We scroll down a little bit here to what Socket.io is not. It says right here, although Socket.io indeed uses WebSocket for transport, we'll talk about what transport is in the next section, whenever possible. Okay, so it will use WebSockets if it can, but sometimes it can't. So scroll down a little bit further to features. Here are the features provided by Socket.io over plain WebSockets. Okay, HTTP polling, long polling fallback. We'll talk about that later. You don't need to worry about what it is. This was the main reason that I wanted it and everybody else wanted it back in 2010. It was very common for WebSockets to not be supported, and right, it says here the browser support was in its infancy. We're past that, right? 97% of browsers now support WebSockets. But this is still a good feature because sometimes you get proxies that are misconfigured or other weird things where things just don't work and you have no idea why. And this will work when WebSockets doesn't. Okay? Next thing, automatic reconnection. This is something that WebSocket doesn't do. WebSocket sometimes will disconnect and the server and the client don't know that it's disconnected, and so the user's looking at stale data. Okay, if you need that to never happen, Socket.io has a heartbeat mechanism which will check to see if we're connected or not. And if we're disconnected, it will automatically reconnect. Okay, and it has, this is just extra awesome, right? Exponential back-off delay, meaning it will slowly send the stuff back in order once the connection's reestablished. So this is an add-on you get with Socket.io that you don't get with WebSockets. Go down a little farther. Packet buffering, this is good. This has to do with how the packets are sent up after you're reconnected. You can read about it. We're not going to spend time on it right now. Acknowledgements, Socket.io will give you the ability to guarantee that the other side got it, or you can take action. So the sender, let's say it's the browser, says, hey, server, hello world, and then the server will run this, hey, I got it. That gives you the ability to run some code when an event happens, right, via acknowledgements. If we scroll down a little bit further, broadcasting, this is something that I use quite a bit. It allows you to send a message to every WebSocket connected to the server, or a socket connected to the server. You can do this in WebSockets, but right, it's a little bit messy, writing loops or however you might try and solve it. You can also do it to a subset of clients, which Socket.io will keep track of for you. And then lastly here in the list is multiplexing. This allows you to have a single connection for a bunch of purposes. So you can think about this like a phone line. A phone line might have 1,000 phone calls on it at any given moment. You don't need 1,000 phone lines, one for each call. You do have to do that with WebSockets. You'd have to connect, if you wanted, say, like an admin section, you'd need a connection for that, and then you could communicate on that. You'd have to initiate a second WebSocket connection for another room, which is maybe your main room. We scroll down a little bit further. Is Socket.io still needed today? Well, that's a fair question, since WebSockets are supported in most browsers. But, and I will wholeheartedly stand behind this, if you use plain WebSockets for your application, eventually you're probably going to need to make all of this stuff, which means you're making Socket.io. And that's silly because there are some awesome developers all over the world working on Socket.io so that you don't have to do this stuff. Okay, so that's the short answer. As a for instance, like why this question is even relevant, it used to be that WebSockets did not support passing binary data. It does now. That was a Socket.io feature that has gone away. Now, maybe these will be replaced someday as the WebSocket API gets stronger and stronger, but at the moment, you can implement native WebSockets, but you're probably going to get to the point where you have to build these in, and you're going to end up making a lousy version of Socket.io. My approach, even in 2023, is that Socket.io is still the best way to implement WebSockets. Okay, so that's where I stand. That's what you can expect. The bulk of the course is going to focus on Socket.io. After we get through a little bit of network talk, we will go through WebSocket implementation. We'll compare it to Socket.io, and then we'll get into making the projects. Thanks for watching.